Well, good evening. My name is Mark Dunley, as I mentioned, and I am the Secretary of the EcoAction Committee of the Green Party United States. And we are co-sponsoring this event with the GPAX, the Green Party's Peace Action Committee. And the idea is to focus on the issue of the relationship between the military and the issue of climate change. Obviously, I think many people know that the United States military is the single largest user of oil on the planet. Obviously, we've had a lot of wars that have been fought over oil, and we also have obviously considerable problems with any war is an environmental disaster, including its impact upon the climate, and then also the whole issue of the power with the fossil fuel industry, and the fact that we devote almost $1 trillion in the United States to the military. When we had proposed a Green New Deal, eco-socialist Green New Deal, back in 2010, one of the things we had said that we would cut the military budget by, at least 50% and hopefully 75% in order to devote more of that funding to deal with climate change. So we're going to have a number of speakers. One of our co-sponsors of the group, GPAX, Haig Hovaness, who's written and spoken on defense issues and the danger of conflict escalation. And he'll be talking a little bit about GPAX and then also about the issue. We have Sue Ann Martinens, who is with In Military Madness Against the Earth, which is a committee of Women Against Military Madness, whose mission is to oppose U.S. militarism and involvement in wars, WHAM trials, systems of harm, oppression, and exploitation. And we'll have David Schwartzman. He's a member of the EcoAction Committee. He's Professor Emeritus from Howard University, an active member of the DC Statehood Green Party and Green Party of the United States. And then we'll end up with Barry Riesch, who's with Veterans for Peace. We'll have all the presenters, 8 to 10 minutes apiece. And then about 8:45, we'll then, after everybody speaks, we'll do a question and answer. We do ask you to put your questions into the chat. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Haig for his introduction and his presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Just got to get my PowerPoint up. All right, I hope you can see that.
We can now see it.
We said,
Okay, I'm going to basically be talking about three major aspects of the environmental impacts of militarism and war. And it's important for me to communicate that these are many different kinds of harm. It's not just the warming issue, which is significant, but as you'll see, there's direct damage to the environment, and there's serious misallocation of resources that a more responsible government would not be engaged in. So I'll try to get through this as efficiently as I can. The pollution is fairly obvious to anyone who's observed military exercises or understands the sheer scale of the U.S. military establishment. The hydrocarbon consumption, jet fuel, ship fuel, gasoline, diesel fuel, not just in wartime, but in constant military maneuvers. When you have these huge fleets at sea and thousands of aircraft that are engaged in training, and you have transport aircraft moving supplies all over the world. Um, uh, as you heard earlier, it's the largest, as an organization, the U.S. Defense Department is the biggest generator of greenhouse gases in the world. But there's much more to the harms than this factor. The military establishment has a big toxic footprint in the United States and overseas because military bases have not been careful over the years in terms of the handling of dangerous materials. In the news a few months ago was a problem at the Pearl Harbor Naval Base because fuel storage tanks had been leaking and contaminating the groundwater for some time. And this is one of the premier US military facilities in the world. It got to the point where people were being sickened near the naval installation because of this. And leaking fuel is the least of these problems. There are Superfund sites all over the country, sites that are highly polluted as a result of improper disposal of toxic materials. And the most dangerous of these are radioactive wastes. When America became committed to the development of nuclear weapons right after their first terrible use in the Pacific War, we engaged in a massive program of generating fissionable materials, mainly plutonium. And a lot of this was centered in Hanford, Washington. And the highly radioactive byproducts of this weapons-grade plutonium processing were stored in metal tanks. And the legacy of that program is 54 million gallons of highly radioactive waste in tanks that are slowly rusting and do not have any kind of lifetime guarantee. For over a decade now, the government has been planning how to safely dispose of all of this vast amount of dangerous radioactive waste. And every time they think they've come up with an idea like encapsulating it in glass or some other high-tech strategy, the whole program is started all over again because of minor quibbles about the approach. The cost associated with cleaning up just Hanford is staggering, in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and it may take decades. And there are other sites all over the country where dangerous nuclear materials were handled to make weapons that many of them which have been disassembled because of the crazy overbuilding of the US nuclear arsenal. So this kind of pollution is going to be with us for a long, long time and be very costly to ameliorate. Then there's the direct environmental pollution. Those of you who can remember the Gulf War, first Gulf War, can recall that the oil wells in Kuwait were set on fire, which blackened the sky for weeks. It took almost a year to extinguish all the fires. More recently, someone, almost certainly the United States, blew up a major natural gas pipeline in the North Sea, and that released a huge amount of methane. Methane is 16 times more greenhouse gas trapping than CO2. So it was a major assault on the environment, and it's pretty much been forgotten. It's gone down the memory hole. Nobody thinks of it as an environmental calamity, but it was. It was a huge release of very destructive gas. Then there's the direct environmental damage. This is literally scarring the earth. This is like cutting the face of the earth, basically, largely from shelling and bombing. There is a very grim article that I always remember. The year I graduated, 1972, Scientific American ran an article called The Cratering of Indochina. And two researchers, university researchers, had made a study of the destruction of the land in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand, adjacent countries. And they determined that 26 million bomb and shell craters exist in Indochina as of 1972. It took a few more years before the war finally ended. And this is damage that is not readily erased. It's literally impossible to quickly remedy this. And so it breaks up agricultural fields that can't be tilled. It creates stagnant water that breeds disease. And it is a visible signs of man's malevolent destruction of the earth. The other photo in this slide shows shell craters in Ukraine. We read about the hundreds of thousands of artillery shells that are needed to attack or defend Ukraine. Every day, thousands and thousands of them are fired, and they're leaving these gaping craters all over the land. Ukraine is noted for its agricultural productivity, but some estimates indicate that 10 or 20% of Ukraine's agricultural land is now pockmarked by these actions of war. And then you have unexploded ordnance. This is a very deadly kind of pollution. And you have mines too, which even long after a war is over, are a lingering cause of death and destruction. You can imagine how eager someone would be to plow a field with unexploded munitions in it. So it's basically sterilizing the land and killing people. These cluster bomblets are encountered by children who think they're toys and that they can play with them. They're all meant to explode when the bomb is dropped, but because the dud rate is significant, like 5%, there are lots of them all over the place, and they're explosively unstable. If you kick one, it might go off, or it might go off by itself if you're just walking by, and they're meant to kill people and destroy vehicles. And these Biden apologized for sending cluster munitions to Ukraine because it was all America had. So we really had to do it. The number of mines right now in Ukraine is just staggering. The current estimates are that at least 2 million mines have been deployed in Ukraine. And the problem with mines is they last a long time, and people lose track of the maps that we use to deploy them. So sooner or later, some innocent person gets killed or maimed by walking into a minefield that's undocumented and forgotten. And then lastly, the harm that's less obvious is the huge diversion of resources from environmental protection. A single Nimitz-class aircraft carrier costs about $13 billion. Never mind the cost of sustaining it at sea with its aircraft and crew and associated vessels, which adds up to much more. But by comparison, the EPA budget is this tiny slice of the federal budget of roughly $10 billion. So this is a very quick outline of the kind of harm that militarism and active warfare is doing. And the US, make no bones about it, is a militarized country. Ever since World War II, it's been intoxicated by its military power. It keeps throwing its weight around the world, looking for trouble and justifying this huge establishment. You can't spend this kind of money without enemies. So if we don't have naturally occurring enemies, we manufacture them by poking our nose into conflicts all over the world and aggravating them. There's also a misallocation of human resources. The U.S. Department of Defense employs over 100,000 engineers. The EPA employs 2,000 environmental engineers. So the way the nation is directing its brain power, its intellectual resources, is skewed just the way we've skewed our financial resources. This is money going in the wrong direction. What can be done? Well, spreading information like this, in the hope that the citizenry will become more alert to these very gross harms that we're doing to the planet, to our own country, and joining organizations. And I've been allowed to make a plug for my own committee, GPAX. So GPAX works to promote peace. We are opposed to a bellicose U.S. foreign policy. We produce webinars, we issue statements, we advise candidates on these issues, and we endorse peace actions and cooperate with other Green Party committees like EcoAction. That's why I'm here tonight. We welcome new members. If you would like to sit in on one of our meetings and eventually become a member of the committee, we are eager, especially if you're under the age of 100. We welcome your inquiries. My email address is there, and my co-chair, Madeline Hoffman, her address is there as well. So that concludes my presentation, and I look forward to your questions later on.
Are you asking me to start?
I'm not sure where our moderator is, but you are next, Susan, so you should begin.
Okay, thank you. I am, as was explained, a member of Women Against Military Madness, and a member. We have a committee which is End Military Madness Against the Earth, and I'm having a little trouble sitting up high enough so you can see me. I'm quite short. Maybe this will help. So, what I wanted to talk to after that excellent presentation, I wanted to talk particularly about something that is definitely related. It is not directly military, but it's related to the military, and that is nuclear power plants. Because in Minnesota, we have a plant called Monticello, and of course, Minneapolis and St. Paul are a huge metro area. And they, billions of gallons of water are used to, we all drink the water from Monticello. And we have other plants as well in Minnesota. But this particular one right now is has two major issues. One is the nuclear reactor license extension. This Monticello reactor is on the Mississippi River, and it's 35 miles northwest of Minneapolis. It's owned by Xcel Energy. It's 53 years old, which is among the three oldest in the U.S., and it's way past its use date. Xcel first reported it found leaked radioactivity in on-site groundwater, but they said there was no impact to health at all with all these millions of people drinking this water. But then they said, oh, about 400,000 gallons are contaminated with something called radioactive tritium. And radioactive tritium is something that you can't take out of the water. They have, these different levels that they put it through and so on, but they can't really get it out of the water. So that means it's cancer producing. And finally, in March of 2023, they informed people about the leak, and it was kept secret by Excel, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was obligated to let people know, or not to let people know about it, but there was no publicity about it to speak of. And at this time, they also applied for a 20-year operating license extension for this plant, which is already past its use date and should not be being operated at all. And so it's a threat to the Mississippi River and the people and the animals and the plants as well that rely on it. Tritium is a radioactive form of hydrogen that combines with oxygen to make water, and it can cross the placenta, posing a risk of birth defects and early pregnancy failures. Ingestion of the water also increases cancer, as I mentioned. It contaminates the groundwater and under the reactor, and then it can enter the food chain. And the soil, and it's just, you can't really talk about, in my experience, nuclear without talking about the environment. So of course it affects the environment. So it stays dangerous for 100 years. And there are some other radioactive chemicals that in the leaked groundwater. And they're also the same as related to illnesses and deaths by nuclear disasters at places like Chernobyl and Fukushima. So what's going on now is there is a coalition of I think there are about 12 groups that have come together. A couple of them involve Native people, they're indigenous people, the RISE group, which is a Native women's group, and also another one, Native group, plus several other water and groups, and where the program that we're doing now, or the actions, are being spearheaded by Nuke Watch. Nuke Watch is an organization that John LaForge has done for years. He's an anti-nuclear activist, and they're located in Wisconsin, not Minnesota, but they're working with this coalition which has been formed, and we're putting pressure as much as we can on the public utilities and commissions in the state of Minnesota. And I'll have information about that, how you can write a letter if you want, which would be great. We have information on how to do that and what to say. So the Monticello reactor is now 80 years old, and it was just designed to run for 40. And then they want to increase it again. And it just should be shut down. Well, in our opinions, all nuclear reactors, or not reactors, but plants should be shut down. So there, I don't know what else to say about this particular thing, except that it is urgent for us. And then a couple days ago, we had an excellent teach-in about Monticello, but not just about Monticello. It was about shutting down the nuclear plants all up and down the Mississippi River, because of course they're all getting this tritium in some form or another. And then also forming larger coalitions and groups. One thing I've been working on, and this one thing this group is that's working on these issues, is a coalition of community groups. So I have been encouraging people to join with either cultivate or create community collaborations when there are common interests. And so that would mean perhaps working with the Green Party. Now, the person who is the executive director of the North American Water Group is George Crocker. And he spoke at this meeting, and he talks about putting together a very large coalition or collaborative group. And I'm going to put in the chat the video of this, which was in part specifically about Monticello, but also went beyond that. George Crocker's been working on water issues and these nuclear issues for decades. And he's extremely knowledgeable. And so I think I want to encourage people to listen to the video that I will be posting the link to. It's on YouTube. And also thinking about building even within your own communities, collaborative groups. I know that the Green Party has already done extensive work around the weapons issues, and I have myself done more work personally with slideshows and things like that are that about how.
Susan, can we begin to wrap up?
Yes, I was just going to wrap up. I'm sorry. And about how, the connection between the nuclear, not just the nuclear, but some of what was presented in the previous talk, and the way that the militarism and all the weapons affect the environment. So you can't really talk about the environment or talk about weapons without talking about the environment. But one of the worst things is that gets cut off. There are many, many good organizations that don't talk about the military connections. It's kind of like, you just can't talk about that. And that is why it's wonderful to see the Green Party, what they're doing. And as we continue on, it's very important that we continue to make those connections. So that's all I'm going to say. And thank you very, very much.
Thank
Oh,
you,
and
Susan.
I'll put that info in the chat.
Yeah. And I also want to apologize for messing up the transition from our previous speaker. I wouldn't say it was a wonderful introduction, but I realized in hindsight that I was on mute the entire time. And so I apologize for that. But our next speaker is David Schwartzman. David, you need to turn on your video so that I can share your screen.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Take it away, David. And I'm also going to try to share. We've had problems the last time with this. Hopefully this will be a little bit better.
Yes, and just as an introduction, I would love to send a PDF of my PowerPoint to anyone that's interested, I have a lot of documentation. I'm not going to cover it in 8 to 10 minutes. So please email me, and I'll put my email in the chat as well. So next slide, please. So this was a very important editorial from Science magazine, a very leading science journal, April 1st, not as April Fool's Day, 2022, to solve climate, first achieve peace. And they also made a big point that China and the U.S. have to collaborate. So it was an implicit opposition to the new Cold War against China. Next slide. Good. So as a result of Putin's criminal war on Ukraine, we've had some very bad consequences, including the boost in U.S. fracking and the potential of natural gas leaking to the atmosphere. Next slide. So who's the winner in this war? Well, I would submit it's U.S. NATO militarism, a boost in military budgets. We'll come back to that. Enlargement of NATO, and both Finland and Sweden are now added to NATO. And of course, fossil capital is the winner on both sides. Next slide. So military spending has increased in the latest data is from 2023. It increased to $2.44 trillion global military spending. This was almost a 7% increase from 2022. Next slide. Next slide, please. And this shows military spending by country. And of course, the U.S. is the world's leader with close to $1 trillion per year in military expenditures. China is quite far behind with less than 1/3 of this. Next slide. So there's data bearing on the release of greenhouse gases from the war. And this is, we need an update from this. This is from COP27. So we'll need a little more research to total it. Next slide. So we should also recognize that Israel is committing not only genocide, but ecocide on the Palestinian people and their land, of course, with continued U.S. complicity. And I have some description on this slide of the definition of ecocide and its harm, particularly in Gaza, which constitutes a war crime. This is actually from the Guardian newspaper. Next slide. And of course, genocide, I think people participating are probably quite aware of this. The latest report from Amnesty International is that Israel is committing acts of genocide in Gaza, and over almost 17,000 children have been killed as a result of the Israeli response to October 7th. Next slide. So what is the main obstacle to preventing catastrophic climate change? Of course, we have it now, but it'd be much worse if we don't control and phase out fossil fuels. And by the way, this image is from a shopping center in China, which I got off the web. Next slide. So I would say that the enemy of both humans and nature is militarized fossil capital. And I put a picture of a zombie stalking the planet, ravaging humans and nature. Next slide. And this is from John Milton's Paradise Lost, about Moloch, the horrid king besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. Next slide. So the military, industrial, fossil fuel, nuclear, state terror, and surveillance complex, which, or MIC for short, I would submit is the Moloch of mass murder. Next slide. So we are now living not only the Anthropocene, but I think a better description is the Capitalocene. And humanity faces this challenge that can the monstrous boulder of militarized fossil capital be pushed down the slope to its well-deserved sedimentary cemetery of prehistory on a path that minimizes destruction of nature and humans. And I'm a geoscientist, so I invoke the sedimentary cemetery here. Next slide. So MIC is can be, of course, the instrumental arm of imperial foreign policy of the U.S. Government, of the military-industrial complex, recognizing again the huge global military spending. The critical obstacles posed by the MIC, and I would emphasize, not the widely exaggerated greenhouse gases of the Pentagon itself, which of course are greater than many countries. But let's look at the data. Next slide. The next slide shows the data of the actual greenhouse gases. So one estimate is from the year 2001 to 2017, it was 0.5% of the cumulative global total greenhouse gas emissions. That is the Pentagon itself. And next slide is another estimate from the literature. And again, I put all the references here. So get the PDF and you can explore. If we look at a higher estimate, up to 5-6% of the global total greenhouse gas emissions, we see that is derived by including the manufacturing of the materials that go into the military-industrial complex. Next slide. And so if we go to a more demilitarized nation and world, then Nick, obviously this would be a shift in manufacturing, going from the military-industrial complex to real needs of people in a nation, in the world, like public transit and rebuilding cities and rail, electric rail, and so on. And we can also project that a shift to renewable energy will greatly reduce these emissions by producing this manufacturing and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So we've already heard about military to global polluter, and I want to mention one aspect that I don't think was mentioned, unless I missed it, and that is the forever chemical impacts, PFAS, that are in surface waters resulting from military-derived sources, fire foams and so on, that have leaked out into groundwater, into fresh water, and bioconcentrated in seafood and fish. And we are now, this is a big issue in the United States and the rest of the world. Pat Elder, who's in the Green Party of Maryland, have done a lot of work on this issue. Next slide. So I want to summarize. The MIC is likely the biggest single obstacle to preventing C3, that is catastrophic climate change, defined as much worse than we now witness. I want to emphasize, we already have catastrophic climate change, but it can be much worse than we see now. And so it's the present core of global capital reproduction, a colossal waste of energy and material resources. Fossil fuel nuclear industry is integrated in the MIC. It has a dominant role in setting domestic and foreign policy, not only the United States, but other countries like Russia. And the Pentagon is a global oil production service, as Mike Clare put it, for the U.S. imperial agenda. And also a protection service for strategic metals. And most of all, I want to emphasize that the imperial agenda blocks the global cooperation and equity required for climate protection. Almost done. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this. I just want to emphasize that most of fossil fuel can be kept in the ground with only a small percentage being used to replace itself by renewable energy, if there is indeed a global dedication to make this transition. And so oil-producing countries like in the Middle East and South America can be valuable partners in this by providing the minimal amount of oil, which has the lowest greenhouse gas footprint of the fossil fuel, and to do away with itself. Of course, that will require the political defeat of fossil capital globally. Next slide. Almost done. Next slide, please, Mark. Okay, so the critical goal is not exceeding the 1.5-degree warming target. Of course, we know that this has been virtually breached in the last year, but it has to be probably for several decades in order to reach the dangerous climate tipping points that would make it much worse for the whole world. So there's uncertainty just how long this would take and how much warming. So we need to invoke the precautionary principle, no overshoot of 1.5 degree. And I want to point to a recent book, a very valuable book by Andreas Malm and Wim Carton, Overshoot, which goes into this in depth, this issue. Next slide. So I would argue that green capital must be engaged in the defeat of fossil capital. This is time limited. We have very little time left to begin to seriously reduce and terminate fossil fuel to keep not to breach the 1.5-degree warming target. And a critical sector of green capital is a capital which actually implements wind and solar power and energy storage technologies and invests in agroecologies and so on. So right now in the world, China has the biggest renewable energy creating sector in the world. And so its government plays a very critical role in financing. Next slide. And this is a critical site for class struggle to accelerate both the phase out of fossil fuel and the creation of renewable energy capacity. It isn't enough just to build renewable energy, which is happening now, and it should go faster. But if it's just on top of continuing and even growth in fossil fuel, we're going to head for climate hell in the world. So we need to have a struggle around state financing and regulation, and most of all, shift subsidies from fossil fuel to the green sector, that is actually to renewable energy. And the latest data from the IMF from 2022, the direct subsidies to fossil fuel was amounted to over $1 trillion. That's in 1 year, $1 trillion. The indirect, even more. Next slide. So this is, I think, close to the last. So meeting the goal of defeating fossil capital and its imperialist agenda, we need to be involved in not only a national, but a transnational movement to dissolve the military-industrial complex and implement a global Green New Deal, increasingly guided by an eco-socialist agenda. We don't start with the full package. We fight for the full package. And that includes demilitarization globally and, of course, a complete termination of fossil fuel consumption. Last slide. next slide, the very last one, Mark, is my motto: radical and radish have the same root. Be as radical as reality itself. And the next few slides are simply a bibliography, which you will get if you send me an email, and I will send you a PDF of the whole thing. Thank you so much, and I hope I didn't go over time.
Well, you probably did, but
Okay,
so
well, I'll pay a fine for that.
I see that Barry Riesch has just joined us. Barry, if you could turn on your video and your mic, your audio. Let's see. So Barry is with the Veterans for Peace chapter, and he's going to finish up. We're a little bit behind schedule at this point. So Barry, you keep about 8 minutes talking about the connection between the military and the climate. Take it away.
I got this thing in front of my face here. How do I get rid of that? Well, you don't. Well, anyhow, sorry about being late. I just heard about this thing. Barry Riesch of Veterans for Peace. I just heard about this thing yesterday afternoon, and Dave from our group said you could apply a couple of people, and I had no idea what time it was, where it was, what it was, and so I just happened to pick up this email just about 10 minutes ago, and saw more detail, and so I'm not anywhere near prepared. I just decided to show up because we said we'd supply somebody. But anyhow, all Dave told me was that somebody was looking to speak yesterday, and I had a very busy day today. And anyhow, so yeah, I'm with Veterans for Peace. I was in the Army. I spent a year in Vietnam, so I know firsthand about military waste and extravagance. I participated in destroying the countryside in Vietnam for a year of my life, something which I regret. And so I know firsthand the wastefulness, the horrible wastefulness of the military, and obviously it's the most destructive, wasteful thing that we do, in this world. And yet it's what we continue to do the most of in this country, where the United States is best known for war. That's what we do. We export, 40% of the world's arms, and the thing about how that relates to the climate crisis is that the amount of fuel and resources that go into making weapons, flying airplanes, ships, weapons manufacture, troops, bases, 800 bases around the world. We're in, I forget how many countries we're involved with. I actually have a slide presentation that we do as our group. I've been with Veterans for Peace since 1991, as we were entering into the first Gulf War, which was a horrible, with the depleted uranium, just the environmental impacts, and not just in its contribution to the climate crisis,